It was a quiet night in our neighborhood, too quiet. The kind of quiet that sends a chill down your spine, the kind that feels unnatural, as though the world is holding its breath. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, tucked away from the noise of the busy streets. The lights were dimmed, the sounds of the city drowned out by the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Inside, everything seemed perfect. My baby girl, Sophia, lay in her crib, her soft breaths rising and falling like the gentle rhythm of the waves. She was so peaceful, so innocent, just as she should be. The lullabies we played every night worked their magic, and I was convinced she was safe. She had always been my little angel, despite her disability. Born with fragile bones, every breath she took was a reminder of how precious her life was to me. She had never once caused a stir. But that night, things felt different. I stood by her crib, gazing down at her serene face, my heart swelling with love and protectiveness. The clock ticked softly in the background, marking each passing second. I could almost feel time itself slowing down as I whispered a silent prayer for her safety. The world outside our home felt distant, irrelevant. It was just me, my little girl, and the quiet hum of the night. We were safe, we had to be. But then I heard it. A noise, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the usual creaks and groans of the house settling into the night. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Was it the wind? Or maybe a stray branch brushing against the window? I held my breath, listening intently, straining to hear over the sound of my own racing heartbeat. The noise came again, this time louder. It was a thud, followed by a soft, unmistakable scraping sound. I stepped away from the crib, my mind suddenly clouded with doubt. The house had always been peaceful, but now, that peace felt fragile. Was I imagining things? Just then, I heard the faintest sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and undeniably close. My pulse quickened. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Who was out there? No one should have been on our property at this hour. It was far too late for anyone to be lurking around. My thoughts immediately jumped to the worst possible scenario, a burglar. Someone trying to break into our home. My heart raced, and panic crept in like a shadow. I glanced over at Sophia, her tiny form still curled up in her crib, completely unaware of the danger that might be creeping closer. Then, I heard the doorbell ring. The sound echoed through the silence of the night, louder than any other noise. It wasn't just a ring, it was a signal. Whoever was outside wasn't there for a friendly visit. They were here with a purpose. In that moment, the hair on my arm stood up. The room felt colder, the walls felt smaller. Something was wrong. I rushed to the window, my breath shallow, trying to catch a glimpse of the figure outside. But before I could see anything clearly, the door handle turned. A cold shiver ran down my spine. And then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. A deafening bang that shattered the stillness. The noise was so sudden, so jarring, that my heart nearly stopped. I spun around, my mind racing, but all I could focus on was the sound that reverberated in my ears. The echo of that shot, louder than anything I had ever experienced. Everything changed in that instant. I ran to Sophia's crib. My eyes locked onto her, praying that she hadn't heard the gunshot, that she hadn't been scared. But as I reached for her, the world seemed to spin. I froze, my hands trembling. She was lying there, motionless, her small body still, as though the world had fallen into a deep, dreadful silence. And that night, everything changed forever. I heard the shot, and my world crumbled. I could still hear the gunshot in my ears, a sound that echoed through the quiet night like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body frozen at the crib's edge. Sophia lay there, still, her little chest rising and falling so faintly that I feared it might stop altogether. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the walls were closing in around me. But before I could reach out to my baby, I heard the sound again, the creak of the door opening, the slow shuffle of feet. It was Karen. I turned sharply, the panic inside me rising as I saw her standing there, her hands shaking at her sides, her face pale and drawn. She had always been a strange neighbor. Quiet, withdrawn, someone who didn't fit in with the other families on the block. I had tried to ignore her oddities, her habit of staring out the window for hours, her strange complaints about noises at all hours of the day and night, her constant fear that something terrible was about to happen. But now, as she stood in the doorway, that fear was undeniable. It was written all over her face. I thought I heard something, she stammered, her voice high-pitched, her hands trembling. I didn't know what to say. My body was still rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on Sophia. I needed to check if she was okay. Was she hurt? But the sound of Karen's voice pulled me back. Karen, what did you do? My voice barely broke the silence, but I could hear the shock and disbelief in it. She had just shot my baby, and I couldn't fathom why. Why would she think there was a threat? Why would she shoot her? I thought it was a burglar, Karen said, her words rushed and scattered. I heard the noise. I thought it was someone breaking in. My mind spun. A burglar? In our home? There was nothing in the world that could make sense of what she was saying. I tried to stay calm, but the frustration was already boiling up inside me. My baby had just been shot. Karen, this is a baby, I spat, moving closer to Sophia's crib now. You don't shoot a baby just because you hear a noise. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as though she was looking for something to hold on to. The way her body trembled, it was clear that she was as rattled as I was, but it didn't excuse what she had done. The gunshot had been real, and my baby had been in the line of fire. I didn't mean to. I thought I heard a burglar, Karen repeated, her voice cracking as though she were trying to convince herself. I heard a noise. I panicked. I didn't think, her words sounded hollow, as though they were a poor excuse for what had just happened. A burst of rage flared up in my chest. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to take a breath, to calm down. This wasn't about Karen right now. This was about Sophia. Is she hurt? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper, my throat tight with terror. Karen's eyes flickered to Sophia, and for a moment, there was no sign of the frantic woman who had just entered my house. Instead, there was a brief flicker of guilt? Fear? It was hard to tell. But she didn't answer. I rushed to the crib, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to move too quickly, didn't want to risk hurting her more. But I needed to know. I needed to know if my baby was okay. I touched Sophia's tiny hand, my fingers trembling as I brushed against her soft skin. She stirred slightly, and my heart soared. She wasn't lifeless. She was still here. Still breathing. But then I saw the blood. A small trickle at the edge of her crib, barely noticeable at first, but it grew larger the more I looked. My heart stopped. My baby was hurt. And it was Karen's fault. Get out! I screamed suddenly, whirling on Karen. Get out of my house. But she didn't leave. She just stood there, her eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing as if she were trying to say something, but no words came out. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had destroyed in that one moment, but the words felt inadequate. What could I say? My baby was bleeding because of her. I backed away from her, never taking my eyes off Sophia. I needed to find help. I needed someone to fix this. But my body wouldn't move. It was as if I was stuck, anchored to the spot by the weight of the horror unfolding before me. Karen, why? I whispered. Why did you do it? I didn't mean to, her voice cracked again, her hands fumbling at her sides. I thought I heard someone. I thought I heard a burglar. But the words didn't make sense anymore. I could feel my own body trembling with anger, with frustration. It wasn't just the pain of seeing my child like this, it was the knowledge that this could have been avoided. If Karen hadn't been so paranoid, if she hadn't been so reckless, my baby wouldn't be lying here, so fragile and so vulnerable. I should have done something. I should have stopped her, I thought to myself. But it was too late now. The damage had been done. The tension in the room grew thick, suffocating. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what had happened, why it had happened, how I had gone from feeling so safe in my own home to being thrust into this nightmare. How had we gotten here? Was it an accident? Did she really think Sophia was a threat? Or was it something darker? I couldn't answer those questions. Not yet. I needed to get Sophia to safety. I needed to get her help. But first, I needed to get Karen out of my house. And in that moment, I knew that something irreversible was about to happen, but I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands were clammy, my chest heaving with shallow breaths. I should have been focused on getting help for Sophia, but the rage, the confusion, and the horror swirling inside me made it impossible to think clearly. The blood. The gunshot. The fact that Karen, a woman I once considered a neighbor, a part of the community, had fired that shot. I stepped closer to her, my heart pounding as the words caught in my throat. How could you think a baby was a threat? I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. I was barely holding myself together, but I had to know. I needed to understand how this could happen. How a woman could believe, even for a second, that my disabled child was a threat to her. Karen's wide eyes locked onto mine. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was shaking now, too, her whole body trembling as if she were unraveling, as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up with her. I thought I heard someone, she stammered, her voice so quiet, so full of fear, it barely felt like it was coming from her. I thought it was a burglar. I didn't know what to do. It was just instinct. I cut her off, unable to bear hearing any more of her excuses. A burglar? In my home? In my baby's room? My words came out in a furious whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile control I still had left. I looked down at Sophia, still lying there in her crib, her tiny form so still it felt like time had stopped. The blood seemed to pool around her like a dark halo. This is my baby. My Sophia. And Karen had done this. You shot my baby because you thought she was a threat? I whispered, the accusation barely leaving my lips. It sounded surreal, even to me. A mother, standing over her bleeding child, questioning the woman who had just pulled the trigger. But nothing felt real anymore. Karen's hands were shaking violently now. Her eyes darted nervously to the floor, to the walls, anywhere but me. She couldn't look at me, not really. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking, she blurted, her breath coming faster. I heard a sound, and it scared me. I thought someone was breaking in. I saw the shadows, and I panicked. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry? Sorry didn't fix this. Sorry didn't heal Sophia's wounds. Sorry didn't reverse the terror I felt, or the fear that now clouded every corner of my home. I stepped back from her, trying to compose myself, to make sense of the chaos swirling in my mind. But I couldn't. There were no answers here. Just an overwhelming sense of loss. My baby, my little girl, had been hurt, and it was because of a woman who couldn't tell the difference between a defenseless child and a burglar. No, I said, my voice suddenly low, deadly quiet. You don't just shoot someone because you're scared. You don't shoot a child because you're afraid of a noise. The words hit like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. She's a baby, Karen. She's disabled. You don't even know what it's like to have to worry every single day whether your child is going to be safe. And now look at what you've done. My throat tightened, the tears threatening to spill. My baby, my Sophia, was lying in front of me, helpless and hurt. And this woman, who was supposed to be a neighbor, a part of my life, had brought this nightmare to my doorstep. I didn't mean it, Karen repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I swear, I didn't. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But her words, her apologies, meant nothing now. They didn't change the fact that my daughter was bleeding. They didn't change the fact that Karen's panic had ruined everything. I took another step back, needing to get away from her, needing to think clearly, to find the strength to help Sophia. But my mind was spinning. The room felt like it was closing in, and I could feel the walls pressing in on me, suffocating me. Why was this happening? Get out, I finally managed to say, the words barely scraping past my lips. My hands were shaking, my chest tight, but I had to say it. I couldn't stand to be near her any longer. I couldn't look at her without feeling the searing rage and disbelief coursing through me. Get out of my house, Karen. She took a step back, her face pale as she looked at me. But instead of leaving, she stood there, frozen, as if waiting for something, perhaps redemption, perhaps forgiveness. But I couldn't give her that. Not right now. Not after what she had done. I'm calling 911, I said, the words coming out as cold and sharp as I could make them. I don't care what you say, Karen. I'm calling the police. Karen's face twisted with panic. No. No, please, she begged, her voice shaking. Don't. Please. I didn't mean it. I didn't know what I was doing. Please don't call them. But I was already reaching for the phone, my hands slick with sweat as I dialed the numbers. The phone felt heavy, like it was slipping through my fingers, but I forced myself to keep it steady. The dispatcher picked up, and I felt like I was finally breaking free from the fog that had surrounded me. 911, what's your emergency? They asked, their voice calm and professional. I need help, I said, the words coming out in a desperate rush. My daughter's been shot. She's in her crib. I don't know how badly she's hurt, but she's bleeding. Please, please send someone now. The dispatcher quickly took down the details, her voice soothing, but all I could focus on was Sophia. The blood. The fear. The fact that my life had just shattered into a million pieces. As I stayed on the phone, Karen remained standing there, still, silent, her face twisted with regret. But her regrets didn't matter. Not now. Not after what she'd done. I barely heard the dispatcher's calm reassurances. My mind was elsewhere, running through the events of the night over and over again, trying to make sense of the chaos. My baby girl, my little Sophia, had been hurt because of a mistake, because someone couldn't control their panic. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. Minutes felt like hours. Every second stretched out longer than the last, my heart racing, my breath coming in uneven gasps. I could barely process the words the dispatcher was saying, but I could hear the sirens in the distance. Help was coming. And yet, even as I heard them drawing closer, all I could focus on was the terrible truth of the moment. I was holding my baby, and the world outside was crumbling. This was not a simple mistake. This wasn't something that could be fixed with apologies or excuses. It was a nightmare I never saw coming. The sirens blared in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. It felt like the longest wait of my life. Each second dragged on, each breath felt like it was taking too much effort. But through the fog of fear, I knew one thing: Sophia was still alive, still breathing, still my little girl. And the world outside? It was falling apart. I stood there in a daze, holding the phone to my ear, hardly registering the dispatcher's reassurances anymore. My focus was entirely on the crib, on Sophia, who had not moved since I'd first seen the blood. I barely noticed Karen still standing there, her body rigid, her face a pale mask of guilt and fear. The door opened, and I didn't even look up at first. But the familiar sound of boots stepping on the hardwood floors broke me from my trance. Police officers, 2 of them, rushed into the room, their faces grim as they assessed the situation. Behind them, I heard more voices, more officers entering the house, presumably to secure the scene. I felt the room begin to close in again, but this time, it wasn't just because of the shock. It was because reality was setting in. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of the officers asked, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. I could see the way he assessed me, the tension in his body language as he looked around the room. He must have been trained for moments like this, but that didn't make it any easier. Nothing about this was easy. I nodded, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. "My daughter," I managed to whisper. "She's been shot. I need help." The officers moved quickly. One of them knelt down by Sophia's crib, checking her pulse, his fingers brushing against her tiny wrist. I couldn't breathe until he looked up at me, giving me the smallest of nods. "She's alive," he said, his voice low but steady. "We'll get her to a hospital, ma'am." The other officer, who had been standing near Karen, finally turned toward me. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently, though his eyes flickered briefly to Karen, whose expression was still one of shock, guilt, and fear. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "Karen, she shot her. She thought she heard a noise, thought Sophia was a burglar." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "Thought my daughter was a burglar." The officer looked from me to Karen, his expression hardening. Karen flinched, visibly recoiling from the scrutiny. But there was no denying it now. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a tragic, unforgivable one. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but the officer cut her off. "We'll get your statement in a minute, ma'am," he said, his tone sharp. "We need to focus on the child right now." I barely heard him as the officers lifted Sophia gently, wrapping her in a soft blanket and rushing her toward the door. I couldn't stop myself from following them, my heart hammering in my chest. My baby, my little girl, was she going to be okay? I stood at the door, my heart in my throat, watching as they loaded Sophia into an ambulance. The sirens wailed, and I knew they had to hurry. But I was paralyzed. I could barely breathe. Karen had followed me out, standing by the door like a shadow, still ashen-faced, still looking as though she couldn't comprehend what had happened. She looked at me with wide eyes, like she was waiting for some kind of forgiveness, some kind of assurance that everything would be okay. But I wasn't going to forgive her. Not now. Not after everything. "Why?" I demanded, my voice rising in frustration. "Why didn't you check first? Why did you just shoot? She's a child, Karen. A baby. What kind of person does that?" Karen flinched again, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to say something, perhaps to apologize again, but I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't. The officers were already moving to take Karen into custody. She was no longer standing there, wringing her hands. The reality of what had happened was beginning to catch up with her. She wasn't in control anymore. The legal system was stepping in. She was no longer just a frightened woman who'd made a mistake. She was a suspect, responsible for the harm that had been done. But it didn't make me feel any better. Nothing was going to undo what had already been done. As the officers led Karen away, I felt a new kind of emptiness settle into my chest. The shock was wearing off, and all I had left was this burning ache, a raw pain that I could barely put into words. How had this happened? How had this woman been allowed into our lives, trusted by the community, and yet, she had destroyed my world in a matter of seconds. I finally turned back to the house. The sound of Karen's footsteps faded as she was escorted to the patrol car, but her presence still lingered in the air. I knew she was gone, but I couldn't escape the feeling that she had already left a permanent mark on everything. As I stepped inside, the gravity of the situation started to settle in. The police were already conducting their investigation, gathering evidence, and taking down statements. I wasn't sure when I would be able to talk to them. Everything felt like a blur. My mind was still locked on one thing: Sophia. I sat down on the couch, unable to tear my gaze away from the spot where her crib used to be. The silence in the house was deafening now. The quiet that had once been a comfort, the kind of peace I had cherished in my home, had been shattered. The phone rang, and I jumped at the sound. I had to force myself to answer it. "Mrs. Smith? This is the hospital. Your daughter is stable for now, but she's still in critical condition. We're doing everything we can, but you should come down immediately." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to feel anymore. Relief? Fear? I didn't know. But I got up, my legs shaky beneath me, and made my way out the door. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. About Karen. About how someone I had once trusted had become the source of so much pain. And all for what? A mistake? No, it couldn't just be that. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a reckless, thoughtless act of violence. When I arrived at the hospital, I barely heard the nurses and doctors as they ushered me through the corridors. Everything seemed muffled, distant. My focus was singular: to see my baby. To know that she was going to be okay. As I stood at Sophia's bedside, looking down at her small, fragile body hooked up to machines, the weight of the moment crashed down on me. The woman who had been my neighbor, someone I had exchanged pleasantries with, someone I thought I knew, had done this. And now, I was left with the consequences, trying to put the pieces of my shattered life back together. The pain in my chest felt unbearable. The doctors had been reassuring, but I wasn't sure I could believe them anymore. I had lived with the constant fear that something could happen to Sophia because of her disability. I never imagined the danger would come from someone so close to us. But as I stood there, watching my daughter fight for her life, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let her down. No matter how deep this hurt, no matter how much anger I felt toward Karen, I had to be there for Sophia. I couldn't lose her. Not after everything we had already been through. And the nightmare, the one that had started with a single gunshot, was far from over. It would never be the same again. But I would fight. I would fight for her, for our family, for the chance to heal. In that moment, standing by Sophia's side, I realized something else, too: my baby's innocence was lost in a moment of madness. The days following the shooting felt like they didn't belong in the real world. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, as though the universe itself had become stuck in a loop of confusion and pain. I spent hours at the hospital, watching Sophia as she clung to life. Every beep of the machines, every new procedure, every doctor's update felt like a test of my strength. But I wasn't just waiting for her body to heal, I was waiting for my heart to heal. I was waiting for a life that had once been safe, that had once felt peaceful, to make sense again. As Sophia began to recover, her fragile body showing small signs of improvement, the real world outside the hospital walls slowly started to catch up. News of the shooting had spread through the neighborhood, and the police were investigating. But what would justice really look like in this situation? What could be done to bring back the innocence that had been stolen in an instant? I wasn't sure what I expected when Karen was arrested. Some part of me thought that maybe she would finally understand the depth of what she'd done, that she would break down in genuine remorse. But when I saw her in court, shackled and broken, I realized that what I had hoped for wasn't going to come to fruition. There was no easy explanation for her actions. No justification for the gunshot that had pierced the air, no explanation for the bullet that had left a permanent scar on our family. The trial was a blur of legal jargon, arguments, and witnesses, and I couldn't bring myself to look at Karen. Her face was pale, and she seemed like a stranger now. The woman who had once lived across the street from us, who had smiled at me at neighborhood events, who had been in my life for years, now seemed like someone unrecognizable. The guilt in her eyes wasn't enough to erase what had been done. Ultimately, Karen was convicted of negligent assault and reckless endangerment. But the legal outcome didn't ease the pain. Nothing about this felt just. She could be sentenced to prison, or she could be ordered to pay a fine, but none of that could undo the irreversible damage. The only thing that really mattered was that my baby was hurt. And no amount of punishment for Karen would take away the years of fear and trauma that we would carry with us forever. As the months passed, I spent less and less time thinking about Karen. Not because I had forgiven her, no, that was something I would never do, but because there was a greater battle to face, the battle for Sophia's future. For months, I focused solely on her recovery, going to physical therapy sessions with her, holding her hand through every painful step. In the quiet moments, as I held Sophia in my arms, I realized how much my life had changed. I had thought that the greatest threat to her safety was her disability. I thought that my biggest fear was that I wouldn't be able to protect her from the world. But that night, the night Karen shot her in her crib, showed me a new fear. It wasn't just about the obvious threats. It was about the people we let into our lives, the people we trust without question. In a strange way, Karen had been the one I least expected to cause harm. And she had shattered that illusion of safety. As Sophia slowly began to regain her strength, I found myself reflecting on what we had lost and what we had gained. The fear, the anger, the disbelief, it never truly disappeared. But something had shifted inside me. I realized that the real battle wasn't just for justice, it was for the strength to keep moving forward. I couldn't let fear and hatred consume me. I couldn't let the past define my daughter's future. Our journey was far from over. The emotional scars would take much longer to heal than the physical ones. But I had learned something crucial through this ordeal, that even when everything feels like it's falling apart, even when your world is shattered by an act of senseless violence, there is a way forward. The way forward isn't always clear, and it's never easy, but it's there. And I would fight for it, for Sophia, for our family. There were moments when I could still hear the gunshot, still feel the terror of that night, still feel the tremor of the fear in my chest as I looked at Sophia's lifeless form in that crib. But as time went on, those moments became fewer and farther between. And in their place, I began to find new moments. Moments of laughter, moments of hope, and moments of love. Sophia, too, had changed. She was stronger now, more resilient, but there was an innocence lost that could never be replaced. I watched as she grew, as she healed, and as she adapted to the world around her. But every time I looked at her, I saw the echoes of that night, and I knew I could never forget. The day came when Sophia took her first steps again, tentative at first but filled with the same determination that had always been her trademark. I held back tears as she reached out to me, her little arms steadying herself against the wall, her face full of wonder and triumph. It was a victory that felt like a reminder of everything we had overcome. And as I watched her walk, I realized something that I had never fully understood before. The greatest strength we have is the ability to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles in our path. There were things in life we couldn't control, people who would hurt us, circumstances that would challenge us, but there was one thing we could always control: how we responded. The day Sophia began walking again was a day I would never forget. It was a sign that even after the darkest, most terrifying experiences, life could still move forward. The pain would always be there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer defined us. We had learned to live in spite of it. We had learned to rise above it. The safety I once believed in, the world I thought I knew, was gone, shattered by a single moment of violence. But what remained was the love of a mother for her child, and the strength of a family to keep going. In the end, justice was served, but what's left is the pain of a mother who will never forget the day her daughter's innocence was shattered. As I sat with Sophia, watching her take those first steps into her future, I realized that the true battle wasn't against Karen or even the fear that had gripped me that night. The true battle was the fight to rebuild, to hold on to the love that made us whole, and to remember that no matter how dark the world may seem, there is always a way forward. The road ahead would be long, but together, we would make it. As I look back on everything that's happened, one thought echoes through my mind: the illusion of safety. We live in neighborhoods we think we can trust, surrounded by people we believe would never hurt us. But what happens when that trust is shattered? What happens when the very place we consider our sanctuary becomes the setting for a nightmare? Sophia's story isn't just about a baby shot in her crib. It's about something much deeper, something we all need to confront as a society. We live in a world where safety often feels like an unspoken guarantee, a promise we take for granted until something terrible disrupts it. That night, the peace I once felt was stripped away in an instant. The neighborhood I had once trusted became the setting for a horror I could never have imagined. The shooting wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of judgment, of empathy, of community. It was a reminder of how quickly the line between safety and danger can blur, and how easy it is to overlook the potential risks until it's too late. What happened to Sophia could have happened to any of us. We are all vulnerable, and sometimes, we forget that. The true cost of violence and misunderstanding isn't just the physical harm done. It's the emotional scars that linger, the broken trust that can never be fully repaired, and the constant fear of what might happen next. It's the awareness that the world is unpredictable, that people are unpredictable, and that safety can never be taken for granted. So, let me leave you with this question: how much are we willing to overlook for the sake of comfort and complacency? How often do we ignore warning signs or make assumptions about people we think we know? We all need to be more aware, more conscious of the world around us, because when we stop paying attention, we risk losing everything. It was no longer just about a baby in a crib. It was about what we as a society are willing to overlook, until it's too late.